Hello, friends. Welcome back to another session of interview questions. So, in today's session, we are going to discuss some of the questions related to Spring Framework, Spring Boot, Spring Microservices. So, all those questions we will learn in this session. So, let me share my screen and we will get started. Okay, I'm able to present. So the very first question interview generally ask, what is Spring Framework? Or before to that one, they might ask, what is framework itself? What is framework? So you can say that a framework is a structure. A framework is a structure that is used to build software or application simply. But you can say framework does not develop the application from scratch. It use some of the base technology, and on top of that base technology it use some of the design patterns, some of the best practices, and it will develop the application. So a framework serves a similar purpose. It is designed and tested by other developers and engineers. So you know it is a solid foundation because it is already well tested code. It is already approved, so we can trust on that and we can develop the application. Okay, so what is Spring Framework? Now a Spring Framework is an open source Java application development framework. Spring Framework is an open source Java application development framework that supports all types of Java application. All types of Java application, it include standalone application, enterprise application, web application, cloud-based application, distributed applications. So all types of application you can develop using Spring Framework. Okay. Now, why to use Spring Framework? This is a very important question. Generally, interviewer will ask why we should use Spring Framework, or why you are using Spring Framework in your application or something like that. So, the first 2 point that is very important, that only just gives the satisfaction answer. What is those one? So Spring Framework develops loosely coupled and high cohesive application. And every software applications or software must have these two features: loosely coupled, high cohesive. Now what is loosely coupled? Loosely coupled means that there should be a minimum dependency should not be there within the classes or within the modules, classes, or structure, whatever you are developing. Among those, dependency should be minimal. And if you use Spring Framework, the dependency will be auto injected. You have no need to specify hard coding that. Okay. And what is high cohesive? High cohesive means the part of the applications, even they are developed separate, but whenever they are integrated, they should work well. They should achieve the goal of your application. They should work fine. They should work smoothly with the when they are integrated. So the parts of module are grouped because they are contribute to a single well defined task. Task, they should be working perfectly. So that is high cohesive, loosely coupled and high cohesive. So Spring Framework is used to develop loosely coupled and high cohesive application. Next, Spring Framework use the design pattern. Some design patterns are suggested by the technology specialist, so that you should use these design pattern to develop the application. So Spring Framework has already implemented that in their framework. So you no need to worry about that. What are all those? First one is a singleton design pattern. If you think the object of application should be a singleton, most of the times in our applications also we are creating only a single object of the class. We are not creating multiple object. Most of the times we are creating only single. We're not creating multiple objects of the class. Yeah, if it is an entity class and that is some different DTO class or entity classes, that is a different case. But generally, if you are connecting with a database, you need one uh, instance variable, or if you are creating a service, only one instance is enough, or any configuration, one instance is enough. Mostly one instances is enough. So you have to make sure each class whatever you are developing, that should always be create that should always create only one single instance. How you will guarantee that? Spring Boot automatically gives the guarantee that by default it will create only single object, will not create a multiple by default. So that is a singleton design pattern. End-to-end design pattern, like, or prototype design pattern, you can say multiple also you can do. It's up to your choice. Front-end design pattern, MVC. If you are developing application using Spring MVC, so front-end design pattern is suggested. You have to use front-end design pattern. But if you use Spring MVC, designs front-end design pattern is already implemented. Factory design pattern. Some of the objects should be available in factory and you should pick those whenever is required for performance, for faster performance for your applications. How it is possible? If you have created all the objects or required objects whenever your application is starting, so the next time whenever someone asks that object, you will directly give. So that is factory design pattern. So that using factory, be in factory or application context, session factory, all it is doing, Spring Framework it is doing. Template method design pattern, like JDBC template. You have to create some templates to do some database operations, such as JDBC templates. If you want to communicate with the database, you need a JDBC connection. For JDBC connection, what you will do with JDBC connection, you will make some database queries. So to make the database queries, you must have a JDBC template format, template design pattern. So who will do that? Spring Framework is providing that one automatically. Proxy design pattern. Some of the proxy should be there. Like you want to execute some of the task before to your business logic. So your business core logic is separate, and other cross-cutting concern or other jobs are separate. How will you do that? How will you do that? You have to use some of the proxy. Proxy is nothing but some additional task that you want to do before to the invocation of actual business logic. So whenever business logic is executing, before to that one you want to execute some of the task. That is nothing but proxy design pattern. You have to use proxy. So that is already, it is implementing like transactional, caching, aspect, secured, async. These all are the uh, Spring Framework is providing. Next one is a decorator design pattern. So is providing decorator design pattern. How you should process the HTTP request in MVC, handling interceptor, delegating filter proxy. So all these are the decorator design pattern. We will take another sessions or another course where we will discuss all the design patterns. Anyway, we need to do some work on that. So, but currently, just you understand some of the design patterns is implemented in the Spring Framework, and you just remember some 5 design pattern, like a singleton design pattern, proxy design pattern, front end design pattern, factory design pattern, template method design pattern, proxy design pattern, decorator design pattern, observer design pattern. Observer design pattern, like listener. You are adding a listener. It will observe. Yeah, when the method is called observer design pattern, it will just, but it will not act as a proxy. Proxy design pattern is a different, observer design pattern is different. Observer just will observe, but it will not stop the processing. Anyway, the business logic will execute. Definitely it will execute, but it will listen, yeah, when it is executing. So if you want to do something, you can do. But if it is not listener, listener will not stop that. But proxy will stop if your security parameter is not passed. Okay. Next, it has an IOC, inverse of control. What is inverse of control? Uh, Inverse of control is nothing but it's a component of Spring Framework, module of component of Spring Core Framework, Spring Core module. That is responsible for create for managing the life cycle of a bean. We will discuss this one. Dependency injection. It has a very strong dependency injection mechanism. Spring Framework has a strong dependency injection mechanism. Next, AOP, aspect oriented programming. This also it has. So dependency injection, IOC, these three can be used to develop loosely coupled and high cohesive application. And last one, Spring Framework is a lightweight because this is a just jar, simple Pojo jars, not a heavy library. It's a very lightweight libraries. Okay. Next, what is IUC? What is IUC? IUC stands for Inverse of Control. It is a module of a Spring Core framework. You can say Spring Framework or Spring Core framework that manages the life cycle of application object. Suppose you are creating one student bean. So who will create the student bean? Who will create the student bean? You say I need an object of student type. Who will create the object? Either you have to create the object or someone has to create the object, and that object you can use. But in Spring Framework we are not creating the objects and all these jobs, we are not doing. Spring Framework automatically creating the object, and Spring Framework call that object as a bean in Spring Framework. So you can say that Spring IOC is a core Spring Core modules feature that is responsible for creating the Spring beans, initializing Spring Bean, destroying Spring Bean. So all these are the features of Spring IOC. In short, you can say Spring IOC is responsible for the life cycle of Spring application bean. Okay, that's it. And it is used to create loosely coupled application. Fine. Next, what is dependency injection? See, initialization of bean dependency called dependency injection. The process of initializing the state, variable, field, or dependency. Same. State means nothing but it's a state of object, like variable of object, or field you can say, or dependency of the Spring Bean. So you can say any of the term you can use. So the process of initializing the state, variable, field, dependency, state or variable or field or dependency of a Spring Bean. Simply you can say that Spring the dependency injection is the process of initializing variables or dependency of Spring Bean, and this is a part of Spring IOC. Okay. Next, how many types of dependency injections are there? See, all these we have discussed in our the Spring course. We have very well we have defined all these in our Spring framework. You can go and check that one. But here just revising how the question can be formed from them. Okay. How many types of dependency injections are there? How many types of? Three types of dependency injections are there. Like dependency can be injected in three ways. Generally, suppose if you have a class, if you have a class student, and in that student class, how student ID, student name, student roll number. These three fields are there. So how will you initialize all these three fields? How many ways you have to initialize those? One is you can initialize them through constructor. You can do it. Yes, through constructor you can initialize. Second one, you can initialize through setter injection. And the third, that is a very powerful approach, that is called field injection also. You can do that one. If you want to do, you can do that one using Java reflection, field injection. Okay, so three types of dependency injections are there. That is constructor injection. So constructor will be used to initialize. Setter injection, setter method will be used to initialize, and field injection, wiring or auto wired annotation will be used. Okay, next. To achieve the constructor injection and setter injection, you can use at the rate auto wired annotations on constructor or method. It will be using constructor injection or method injection, setter injection. Okay, what is Spring IOC container or Spring container? Spring container, like it is just manage the Spring Bean. Like it will store the Spring Bean in the container, and whenever someone will ask, yeah, I need the subject, the Spring container job is to provide the bean object. That's it. So Spring container manages the bean of Spring application. Spring application needs some of the beans. So who will manage all those beans? Suppose 10 object has to be created in your application. So where the 10 object will be stored? Some place should be there where it is will be storing. So Spring framework, Spring containers responsibility is to manage the bean, where it will be stored. If someone will ask, then provide the bean. Okay. So when bean required, Spring container will pick and initialize with the help of dependency injection. Okay. There are two types of container: bean factory and application context. Bean factory is old one, and application context is new one. So now everyone is using application context only. There is a difference. There is a difference. We'll see that one. Application. So bean factory. Annotation based dependency injection not supported. It's old one, because at that time they are not introduced. In the Java, annotation is introduced later. So annotation based also it's not supporting bean factory, but application context supporting annotation based dependency injection. Bean factory does not support enterprise services like creating the enterprise beans. All it is not doing. Yeah, it is supporting. It is supporting. Fine. Default, it is a lazy loading. It is default. It is eager loading. Eager loading. Okay, strategies for me. What is bean? So far I have discussed bean. What is bean? An object of a class created by a Spring container called bean in a Spring. Each bean has ID called name of the bean. Bean will have ID, or you can say bean will have a name that is unique for all the bean object. Bean, and that is unique for every bean in Spring container. Fine. What is the default name of Spring Bean? Suppose you said each bean will have a name, and it is unique. It is required also. So if I don't give any bean name, then what will be the default name? So bean we can create in two ways. One, we can create the bean using configuration file. In that configuration file, we will define some method. In that method will return some type of bean, and we will mark at the rate bean annotations on top of that. So bean will be creating. But in that case, what will be the name of bean? The method name itself will be the name of bean. Method name itself will be the name of bean. If we are using any stereotype notation, we will discuss what is stereotype notations. Stereotype notations, like it is doing auto configuration. You don't need to configure the bean in the configuration file. Spring is also minimizing that configuration. Just you need to give a component scan. Automatically component it is scanning. On the basis of component scan, if there any stereotype notation found, Spring will create the bean. But what will be the name? The name will be the class name. Just following the naming convention of variable. That's it. Okay. So this is the default name of a bean. Next, if I want to customize the name of bean, how can I do? How can I do? Using at the rate bean, my beans. You can use at the rate bean annotation. In that bean annotations, you can define what should be the name of bean. You can use it. Or else, if you are using stereotype annotation, then inside stereotype annotation itself, you can specify what should be the name of bean. Okay. What is the default scope of bean? What is the default scope of bean? Singleton is the default scope of the bean. Okay. How to use other design pattern or design or bean scope? Like you want to use any other bean scope, how can you use? Just you have to use at the rate scope annotation. Scope prototype. It will create a prototype, multiple or session or request or application context, anything. Okay. Next, how many types of scope are there totally? Total six type of scopes are there in Spring Bean. One is singleton scope by default, and a single bean definitions to a single object instance for each Spring IOC container. Okay. Prototype scope, a single bean definition to many number of object instance. Okay. Request scope whenever your application is running in HTTP. In HTTP request, that object should available. Always it should be available in every request. How it will be possible if you mark that request scope as a request? Okay. Session, you want be this in available in session. It will be available in session. Okay. Application this is some web aware application should be running. Leave these two currently. Next, what is the default bean loading strategy? What is the meaning of bean loading strategy? Loading strategy means what? When object should be created. Loading strategy is nothing but defines when object should be created. Object should be created when your application is starting, or object should be created when you need the object. There are two ways. I have to give something to you. I have to write a letter, or I have to write something on page, and I have to give you. There are two approaches to do this. One, you come and ask. At that time, I will write and give. Second, I will write and keep with me. Whenever you will come, I will give you. Two approaches are there. Which one is best? So, performance wise, the second one is best. If I keep always ready with me, I have written it and I have kept with me. It's ready with me. It's with me. Whenever will someone will ask, I will give. It means that is a very well in performance, not stopping the work. So that strategy is followed by Spring Framework by default. Whenever application is starting, at that time only Spring is creating the bean object. Bean object. So what is the default bean loading strategy? Aggressive loading strategy. Aggressive loading strategy. If bean scope is singleton, and what is the default scope? Singleton. The default scope is singleton. Okay, scope is singleton, single object has to be created. It means aggressively whenever application is starting, will create. Lazy loading also by default, but in that case, bean scope should be prototype. Bean scope should be prototype. If it is a prototype, then multiple object has to be created. Spring don't know how many has to be created, will not create anyone. Someone will ask, will create and give, will create and give. Okay, that is the default loading strategy. And if you want to customize that loading strategy, how can you do? Use at the rate lazy annotation. Lazy true or false. Lazy true means it's a lazy, will not create the object. Whenever you ask, it will create. It's a lazy. Lazy false. False means will create immediately when application is starting. Okay. What is wiring? Wiring is the process of injecting or initializing the dependency of bean of property, bean or property of bean. Suppose there is a one student class. Student class has a two three fields: student ID, name, address, something. So who will initialize those? Spring is initializing. In Spring framework, Spring is initializing. You are not initializing. How Spring will initialize? Three ways are there: constructor, setter, or field. So wiring is the process of initializing the dependency of a bean. Through wiring, it will initialize. Through wiring it will initialize. So wiring, what is wiring? Wiring is the process of injecting, initializing the dependency of bean or property of bean through at the rate auto wired annotation. Automatically is wiring happening. We can achieve wiring in the Spring framework. Yeah, through auto wired annotations we can achieve wiring. Okay. How many types of wiring are there? Four types of wiring are there: by type, by name, constructor, no. And what is the default wiring? The default wiring is by type. First by type, then by name. How? See, Spring container has a some of the object is created. Student. Suppose student type object is created in Spring container. Someone will ask, I need an object of Spring frame. I need an object. So you will check what type of object you are looking for. I'm looking for student type object. Okay. Student type object, Spring framework, what it is checking? Spring framework directly will check, is there any object of student type running? Yes, running. Any means one, exact one object is there. It found that, yeah, one object is there, only one object of student type is there. Spring will initialize directly. So it is by type only. Suppose in the second scenario, Spring, you are asking to Spring, I need a student type object. Okay, fine. Spring is searching object in its container, and Spring found that two object type objects are object type beans are there. Two student type object are there. What it will do? It can't decide which one has to give. Two are there. You are asking, I need one object of student. But in Spring container, Spring found two beans are there. Two objects are there. Which one Spring will give? Can't give any randomly. Then it will go by name. Then by name means it will check what is your variable name. What is your variable name? So it will check whether is there any bean whose name is equal to this name. Type is okay. Two objects are there of student type. What are the name of the beans? And if any bean is there whose name out of these two are same with the variable name, if it is there, Spring will initialize that. If it is not there, then we'll give no unique bean definition exception, because first it is tried to pick by the type. By type, no found. By name, not found. No unique. Okay, so the default strategy is by type and second by name. Okay, how to use by name wiring mode? If you directly want to use by name, then you can use at the rate qualifier annotation. That's it. Qualifier annotation, then you give bean ID. Qualifier means I want to inject by name. So directly Spring will pick and initialize. That's it. Okay. Now, what is auto scanning? Yeah, auto scanning feature is also there for stereotype annotations. We have already discussed. Suppose you are defining your bean in Spring configuration file. That is also sometimes a difficult task because it's not required. It's not required. You are creating only the classes, no? On the top of class itself, you can mark the one annotation. Your bean will be created. That's it. Very simple. Instead of creating a separate configuration class for the bean, tedious job. For that configurations, to minimize that configuration, Spring has provided auto configuration or auto scanning. Sorry, auto scanning feature. Automatically it will scan and it will create the bean. So auto scanning is the feature of Spring IUC that creates the Spring Bean without bean configuration explicitly. Auto scanning in Spring Framework automatically scan, detects, and instantiate the bean from specified base package. Yeah, you have to specify a base package. In that package, how many packages are there? If any sub packages are there, anything is there, create the bean automatically. You don't need to configure explicitly. In auto scanning, Spring will detect the bean class by stereotype annotations and create the bean. So, what is stereotype annotation? These are the stereotype annotations. What are these stereotype annotations? Stereotype annotations defined by Spring Framework to create the object without having extra configuration. These annotations are used to create Spring Framework bean automatically in the application context. Following are the stereotype annotations: at the rate component, at the rate service, at the rate repository, at the rate controller, at the rate rest controller. These all are the stereotype annotations. Spring will automatically detect and create the B. You no need to configure explicitly in configuration file. Okay. All those we have seen in our sessions, in our complete in our course. You can go and watch. Here just we are revising the questions, how question can be made. What is what is the use of at the rate component annotation? Component annotation is generally indicate that this is a utility class. It is not coming under any of the business, any of the layer. Application has a layer: service layer, repository layer, controller layer. Will have a layers. If your class is not coming inside any of the layer, it means it is a utility class. It is a supporting class for all other functionality. So that you can mark at the rate component. Okay. If it is coming under service layer, you can use at the rate service. Service indicate that the class holding the business logic. Okay. Repository means indicating that you are making database operations, database curl operation, or any other operations you are making. It means it's a repository. Controller means it is a processing your user request. At the rate controller indicate that the class holding operation for user request from HTTP request for Spring MVC. And if it is a REST controller, then REST controller indicate that the class holding the operation of user request in form of HTTP request for Spring REST. Okay. How to enable auto scanning? You have to enable auto scanning, no? Then only it will scan automatically. By default, it cannot do. So that you can do using at the rate component scan annotation. At the rate component scan. Here you will specify your base package. Package name will be there like some com.tech hub, something like that. XML no one is using nowadays. You don't need to worry, but still you can use at the rate component scan. This tag has to be specified in the XML, but not required. Just annotation based configuration is used, especially in the Spring Boot. There is no XML configuration. Okay. What is AOP? AOP stands for Aspect Oriented Programming, and that is nothing but it keeps the cross cutting concerns from the business logic. Cross cutting concern is nothing but some pre processing job and post processing jobs. Suppose there is a one business method. Before to invoking that business method, I want to log the record at what time request came, what time request exited. Something I want to log. How can I do it? Using AOP you can do it easily without without in adding extra code in business logic. Without adding extra code in business logic also you can do it. That is called AOP. Loosely coupled, very loosely coupled. You are doing loosely coupling your code. You are not writing that code in business logic, but still the code is working fine with the AOP. You want to log, you want to do some security checks on the parameter, some validation on the parameter. How can you do? Using AOP you can do. Okay. What is an aspect? Aspect are the cross-cutting concern that are used across multiple classes. Aspect are the cross-cutting concern that are used across multiple classes. For example, transaction management, logging, security, etc. That is aspect. How to enable AOP? You have to use @enable aspect J auto proxy annotations. You have to use on Spring Boot main class. You can use it. And this is the dependency aspect JWeaver. Okay, AOP starter. If you use Spring Boot AOP starter, you add. That's it. Okay, fine. What is aspect? This is a class. Aspect is a class or group of methods where all the cross-cutting concerns are implemented. So a class that defines a cross-cutting concern called an aspect, and the class has to be marked with @aspect annotation. What is advise? Advise, like each method of aspect class called advise. Each method of aspect class called advise that implements the cross-cutting concern. What is join point? Join point, the main business logic is called join point. Okay, which can be which the advice can be called is known as join point. What is point cut? Point cut is nothing but is point expression language, that some expression language it will use to identify what is the what is the point join point. Okay, here from this diagram you can understand ATM log aspect, like uh, whenever you are withdrawing some amount from ATM or you are checking your balance, what operations you can do in ATM? You can withdraw amount, you can check balance, you can change your pin, you can activate your pin. Okay, so these all are the 4 5 functions that you can do using ATM machine. What I want whenever any operation is calling, then who is calling that operations, what time it is calling, all that I want to log in the file. How can I do it? Using using EOP I can do very easily, or else without that also it is possible. You have to write the same logic inside the code itself, but that is tightly coupling. Code is not loosely coupled, it's a tightly coupling, but application should be loosely coupled and high cohesive. For loosely coupling you can use AOP, and if it is AOP you are using, you can separate that code, and you have to, you no need to touch that code also. You no need to touch that code, just write the separate code, automatically it will invoke. That is the beauty of Spring AOP. Fine. So ATM log aspect, this is an advice. In this advice all the aspects are there. Sorry, this is the aspect. ATM log aspect, this is an aspect. Okay, advise, the method. Second, this method greet before advise, this is a method. Advice type, how many type of advice are there? 5 types of advice are there, before, after something. Okay, EL expression designator, all these are there. Okay, how many types of advice are there? 5 type of advices are there, like at the rate, before, after returning, after throwing, around. Around means both, it will execute after and before. Okay, now what is MVC? MVC is another module, another web module of a Spring framework. Spring MVC is a Spring web module. You can say that. Very simple. What is MVC? If you someone say what is MVC, so Spring MVC is Spring web module that is used to develop the web application in Java using Servlet JSP theme leaf and front-end controller design pattern. It is implemented as a front-end controller design pattern. Okay, that is called Spring MVC. Spring MVC is a Spring web module that is used to develop the web application in Java using Servlet JSP theme leaf and front-end controller design pattern. Okay, how Spring use Servlet? How Spring use Servlet? Spring use servlet with the help of dispatcher servlet. With the help of a dispatcher servlet. Okay, Spring Web MVC has defined its own servlet called dispatcher servlet to process HTTP request. Dispatcher servlet is implemented as a front-end controller design pattern. Front-end design pattern. Front-end controller design pattern. Okay. What is front-end controller design pattern? What is front-end controller design pattern? Suppose you have in your house there are how many gates are there? Generally, one gate will be there. At most, two gate will be there. Is it like that? Your house has a 10 gates around? No. If it is like that, then what you have to do? You have to add extra security at 10 gates. Or there is a one room. In that one room, if two uh, door are there, then each door you have to put some security. If it is a one room, then definitely you have to put one security on that room only, that door only. So that is the concept behind front end controller design pattern. Your application should have only one entry point. Your application should not have a multiple entry point. It must have only one entry point. That is achieved through front end controller design pattern. So Spring Dispatcher Servlet is implemented as a front-end controller design pattern. You don't need to worry about that. Okay, fine. How to use Dispatcher Servlet? How to use Dispatcher Servlet? The very first thing you have to configure Dispatcher Servlet in web.xml file. You have to configure it. Anyway, if it is a servlet, then servlet definitely has to be configured in in web.xml file, or it has to be marked with @servlet. Some annotations is there, you have to use that one. Second thing, you have to mark that with @controller. Any You have to create a class, and that class has to be marked with @controller annotation. And inside that controller, if you want to develop some of the methods like get, post, delete, put, patch, any method, then you have to use @get, post, delete, put. All these annotations you have to use. Okay, and then that method return type should be either string or model and view. Can be any of them. It can be string or it can be model and view. Okay, fine. What is model and view? See, model and view is a return type for the controller method, and it represents two things. Model means the data that has to be displayed on your HTML file, and view means what is the name of the file. What is the name of HTML file and what is the data of HTML file, that is called model and view. Okay, fine. What is the use of model attribute? See, you have to process a form. Suppose sometime from the UI user is filling the form and click on submit button, sending data. So that data, how will you collect? Who will collect that data? How will you collect? So @model attribute will be used to collect the form submitted data. That can be from ThemeLeaf or JSP or something. Any front end technologies be there. Okay. What is the use of @valid annotation? @valid annotation. How will you use it? So valid annotation. Suppose if you want to do some validations on model attribute, whatever the model attribute you are using to collect the form data, you have to validate the form. How will you do that validation? You have to use some of the annotation, that is @valid. Valid means it will do the validations. But how the validation is happening? You have to use some of the classes. Suppose uh, you see this code: public a post mapping add customer valid model attribute customer DTO. So customer DTO, how will be validated? Like customer will have customer ID, name, date, something, some field will be there. How it will be validated? Just this annotation, how it will validate? Because this annotations has will collect the result in binding result. If there is an error, it will come in binding result, and then you have to process accordingly. If there is an error, you have to do something. Otherwise, do something like that. Okay. There are some of the annotations for validations. We will discuss that in next. It will come. We will discuss those also. Some of the annotations are there for validations. We will discuss those. Okay. What is request param? To process the request parameter. If you want to take only parameters from the request, you can take at the rate request annotations. At the rate request param, path param like query parameter. If you want to collect, you can use path param annotations. Path variable, generally this will be used in the RESTful web services. Like path will be considered as the data. For more loosely coupled, parameter will be loosely coupled. In this case, there is no parameter here. Parameter names are there, but you can avoid those using path variable also. Okay. What is web services? What is web services? See, this is a client server application. You can say that web service is client service application, and that makes communication over HTTP protocol. And web services are reusable software component. You can say that are available to be consumed by some other application. And web services will not have a UI. Web services, if someone asks what is web services is a client server application that communicates over HTTP protocol. And web services are reusable software component. You can say that also. Web services are reusable software component that are available to be consumed by other application. Web services can be SOAP or REST. SOAP, even I have also not worked on SOAP. REST is nowadays is using. So the REST web services is very popular nowadays. Okay. Web services are client server application that communicates mostly over HTTP protocol. Okay. So this is the best answer. This is the best answer. What is web services? Web services are a reusable software component that are available to be consumed by other application and make communication over HTTP protocol. And RESTful is the very popular web services. Fine. Spring provide the support for REST services with strict adherence of a REST principle. Following are the advantages of making functionality of application as a RESTful. Like it should be easy communication. Communication should be easy. Communication should be easy. Resource sharing, yes. Resource sharing is possible through web services. Resource sharing, reusability, easy communication, very easy in communicating. Reusability, yeah, definitely. Resources, the code we can reuse multiple places wherever it is required. Independent client service architecture, yes. Why to use web services? Tell me, why to use web services? If for better reusability of code or resources, for better uh, reusability of code or resources. And second thing, to make communication possible between the application, if the applications are written in its separate technologies. Suppose front end is written in Angular or React, and back end you want to do in Java. Is it possible? Yes, rest is possible. Okay. And suppose if your application is running in separate technologies, you want to develop something in new technology. Is it possible? Yes, in the rest it is possible, because the technology stack might be different. No problem. Okay. What is the difference between web application and REST application? The difference between web application and a REST application. Web application meant for human, REST application meant for application. Web application will have a UI, REST application will not have a UI. Web application accessed through web browser, REST application accessed through code only. Web application reusing the functionality. In web application, reusing the functionality is difficult or not possible. But in REST application, reusability and functionality is very easy, and it's a very easy and popular for the reusability. Okay, how many methods are there in HTTP request? 5. Get, post, put, delete, patch. Get is used. Get is used to fetch the resource from server. Post is used to add a new resource to the server. Put is used to update an existing resource on server. Delete is used to delete or discard the resource from server. Patch is used to partially update the existing resources. Partially update means I don't want to update the full details. I want to update only the some of the details of the existing source. Okay, fine. What is the difference between URL, URN, URI? What is the difference? See, URL is the only server path, like like www.google.com. That's it. That is a URL. www.google.com. That's it. URL path. URN is the resource path inside your Google. How many resources are there? Like user ID, pass user ID, username, some detail you are passing. That is the resource path. So only resource path is URN, and the mix of both is called URI. There is a URI, full URI. Okay, fine. What is the difference between controller and REST controller? See, controller is for MVC, Spring MVC. At the rate controller is for Spring MVC. At the rate REST controller is for Spring REST. Okay. Uh, at the rate controller can have a return type of only string and model and view, but it can have any type of a return type. Okay. Can be used same as REST controller by using response body. If you want to use at the rate controller for HTTP request, REST, HTTP REST call and REST call. So you have to use response body. But this is a combination of controller and at the rate controller and at the rate response body. Map the request data using at the rate model attribute. It map the request data using response body. You can see this one. Okay. Here you have seen in the last we have seen already. Model attribute was there before validate, at the rate validate. There was model attribute, but now it is a request body. Okay. What is response entity? Response entity is used to send the response data to client. Not mandatory. We can directly return exact type also. It's fine. What is the default consume and produce type of a Spring? Like the default, what type of the message, how it is taking JSON type. Default type is JSON only. How to customize those? You have to use like that. Consume application XML, application produce XML, like that. You have to use XML, JSON, plain text, PDF, anything you want to use, you can use. Okay. And the Maven dependency is for Jackson data format XML. You have to add this dependency explicitly because Spring is done not using directly because no one is using XML now. JSON is the very powerful and easy to read. So JSON is only using. In how many ways we can extract the URI data? URI data we can extract in 3 ways: query parameter, path parameter, matrix parameter. Query parameter, like the data will be in a queries like question mark, then ampersand we will use to make the more than one parameter. We can use that one, something like that. See, telephone directory, get contact, offset 1, limit 5. So 5 it will return 5 from first. So here offset and limit name you can see. You have to give like that. So that is a query parameter. You have to use at the rate request param annotations to collect that. Path param, you have to use path variable. In that case, you just have to, is very loosely coupled. Not parameters are not tightly coupled here. You can see there is no parameter name itself, just direct value you need to pass. Simple, that's it. That you can collect using at the rate path variable. Matrix parameter, no one is using even. We have also not seen any scenario, but you can still use rate 1, 2, 3. Multiple values it can have. Matrix means multiple values it have. Okay, matrix variable you have to use, and you have to configure this one. You have to configure like that. Web MVC configurer support something you have to extend. Then you have to override this method, and then you have to give this implementation. Then only this matrix variable will be supported. Okay, how to handle the exception in Spring REST? So the first approach, you can use AOP. We have already discussed AOP is there. We can use AOP. So whatever the exception your REST will throw, that will be catched using the controller aspect advice, REST controller advice. In that advice, like exception handler, at the rate exception handler, it will handle the exception. This exception, if uh, your a REST method through telephone directory exception, it will catch this one. Or any other type, you can just have to specify the type of exception here. That type of exception, if it is throwing, it will handle. It will handle telephone directory exception. It will come here, and something you want to log something, you want to return something, you can do it. Whatever you want to do, you can do it here. Okay, fine. This is the data validation, like at the rate valid annotation. If we have to use, then how it will be validated? How it will validate? How it will validate? You have to use any of the annotations on your model or attribute class. In the request body or model attribute model entity, you have to use these annotations. At the rate digit, how many digits a number can have, or it will be having email. Yes, it will have this much maximum value, minimum value, positive. It should be not empty, should be not null, not blank, null, pattern, past or present. So these all are the annotations has to be used. Something like that you can use. See, at the rate valid request body, before it was the at the rate model something, what was that? At the rate model attribute. Yes, now we are using request body because in Spring REST it is request body, or else it's a model attribute. So model at request body validate. How it will validate? Directory contact. In directory contact class, what are the fields are there? On top of that field, you can use the appropriate annotations to validate that. Automatically it will be validated, and the validations will come in error, or that binding errors you can use, or binding errors, that whatever binding result it will come. Okay, what is cross origin resource sharing? What is cross origin resource sharing? Suppose you have developed one REST, but that REST services you are accessing in the same domain means in the same computer. In the same computer, you are installing front end and back end, and you are accessing. The communication is possible, but resource sharing for other domain is not possible by default. Your Spring is not allowing by default. You have to allow that one. So for that one, you have to use at the rate cross origin annotations. So cross origin resource sharing is a mechanism that allow restricted resources on web pages to be accessed from another domain outside the domain from which the first resources was served. So how to bind? There are three ways to bind. You can bind you on controller itself, or you can bind controller method or controller class itself, or by using globally also you can configure. So how to apply cross origin on controller and method using at the rate rest origin cross origin annotations? You have to use it. What are the variable available with cross origin annotations? How many are there, like origins, like list of the allowed origins to access the method? These are the allowed origins, the IP address of a domains you can give. That that only can access. Next, allow method. Method means the list of supported HTTP method. What should be the method? Method should be this many. Get, post, something. Allowed header. If header is this much only is allowed. Other headers are not allowed. Exposed header. Allowed credential. Some credentials will be there. If this is the credential, then only you have to uh, uh, allow something like that. Okay, fine. How to apply cross origin globally? Globally, if you want, you can do it like that. WebMVC configure and add cross mapping, cross registry, add mapping here, something method, something like that. Method allowed mapping, credential allowed, expose header allowed, something like that. It will be do fine. What is API versioning? Giving a new version for the API, giving a new version for the giving a new version for REST services. For existing REST services, if you want to give a new version, that is nothing but versioning, new versioning. Creating a new version for already existing service called API versioning. Okay. Why API versioning required? API versioning, a service become important when we want to create a new version of already existing service, but at the same time we need to support the earlier version also. Suppose I have created a new version for some API, but I want both support. I want backward support also. That should be working. This should also be working. How it is possible? Using versioning. Okay, so that's why versioning is important. In how many ways we can achieve API versioning? Four ways are there. URI versioning, just give separate URL, separate URL itself. URI versioning. Custom header versioning. In that case, you are not giving the new URL. URL you want to keep same, but just add a next extra header. Extra header you just have to add. So as per the header, it will call. Except header, like inside except header, you just add some extra parameter. That's it. It will call. Request param. If you want to use some extra parameter, using extra path parameter, you want to call, you can call it. It's up to your choice. I think best is the custom header versioning. Just introduce a new variable in that custom header. It will call. If you are not passing by default, it will call that one. That's it. Fine. What is URI versioning? Create a new version, new URL. Yes, you can create a new URL. Custom header versioning, like header you have to pass this one. API version 3. In header you have to pass the header information, like header API version is equal to 3 or 4, something like that you will call. Except header, like you have to in the except header, like text plain is there. That is except header. In that, just you simply pass app v5 v6, something like that. After dot, whatever you will take. Fine. Parameter version, like you have to pass the parameter, like version. This should be version 7, something like that. Pass. Okay. API documentation. What is API documentation? API documentation is important when you want to detail the API. Suppose you cannot do that. See, the very first approach is you have created one service, and that service you want to give the front end developer so that they can integrate in their application. So the very first approach is you will write all the information in Excel or in Word file or in text file, and you send them all the detail. All the details means what is the URL, what is the request method name, method URL, method request body, method parameters, type of the parameter, return type. All those information you will specify in the file and you send them. This is one approach, but this will be very difficult for if your services are very huge, and for it's not for good for maintenance. You must have some mechanism where it will be automatically maintaining. That is where the picture comes API documentation. So Swagger will be used for API documentations. Automatically Swagger UI, open API, Swagger is providing open API. That just you have to add open API dependency in the Spring application and just have to configure the beans. That's it. Open API bean and open API group bean, and your API will be ready. So Open API documentation is a technical content that describe the API in detail. It is a technical content deliverable content instruction about how to effectively use the interaction with API. It is a concise reference manual containing all the information required to work with the API, with detail about the function, classes, return type, argument, and more. How to create the API? How to create API documentation in Spring? Using Swagger. Using Swagger, you can do it. One is you have to add Open API Maven dependency. Then define the Open API configuration bean configuration file. In that one, Open API and grouped Open API. These two beans you have to create. Open API will have the documentation information such as title, license, etc. And grouped Open API will have the detail of controller class and URL. That's it. And extra information if you want, but that is not required. But still, if you want some extra information in controller, you can add it, like operation parameters, tags, something you want to use it. Fine. So this is all about the Spring Framework. Spring Framework, some of the basic questions: why Spring Framework is used, what are the features of Spring Framework. So all those we have discussed. So in the next session, we will discuss about the Spring Boot questions. Then we will go with Spring Microservices. So thank you and have a nice day.